That day you were there, how long did your conversation last, and how did you leave?
The conversation probably lasted an hour and a half, and I left. It was all quite cordial, but I didn't feel that there was any sense of continuity, and I didn't go back. You have to remember that I really studiously avoided, for instance, trying to discuss his literature with him, because I knew that he would really loathe being interviewed, so to speak, by an English professor, right? And so we talked about other things. I did get the sense of a kind of a intense commitment to the creative life that he had, and that I think he felt that a creative artist was significantly different from everyone else in their dedication, and in his case, in the dedication to perfection. And the people whom Salinger reminds me of most in Western culture in our era are the great pianist Glenn Gould and the great chess player Bobby Fischer. Probably each of them the greatest in their field, ever. Glenn Gould, I believe, stopped performing at the age of 27. And after that, he continued to play, but he played in studios, he made recordings, and he made tapes of his recordings by snipping and editing, trying to create the perfect recording, which would be much more perfect than any individual performance that he could ever give. Fischer didn't just become world champion at a young age. He destroyed all the other chess players. He didn't win by a little bit. He won enormously. And my feeling about Fischer, who was certainly partly mad, my feeling is that he spent the rest of his life wishing that he could be playing chess against God. I don't think he wanted to play with a mere human being. He was so much better. So what I see in Glenn Gould and Fischer and Salinger is a desire for perfection, a desire for the absolute that is very intolerant of all the compromises that all of us have to make to live our ordinary lives in this world. I went off and lived in South America for several years, and I went to Antarctica, amongst other things. And I sent him a postcard from Antarctica. When I got back to America, I stopped by, and he did not invite me up to the house. He stood on the porch. He stood on it's not a porch. He stood on the deck and talked to me from there. I said, so did you get my postcard? He said, what postcard? I said, the postcard I sent you from Antarctica. And he gazed down with real, I don't know if it was condescension or scorn or pity. And his only words were, "You're so conventionally romantic." So that for him, even Antarctica was of no real interest.
Now, what year would that have been?
Summer of '74.
Right after, well, a few
After
years
my
after
return,
it would have been several years after the initial meeting.
6 years after the initial meeting, and just after my return from 3 years in South America. And I think that's typical of Salinger. You're so conventionally romantic. As if being in love with the incredible beauty of Antarctica, the ends of the earth, is nothing but a conventional response, just like everyone else.
Yeah.
So I think his desire to be sui generis, a man unto himself, one person, individual, was very great. Yeah.
Was that the last time you ever saw him?
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that he said to you that he was still writing every day, and we're starting to get a glimpse into his life a little bit. Some letters in possession of the Morgan Library and Museum, a letter that he sent to E. Michael Mitchell, I think, the illustrator who did the cover for The Catcher in the Rye, I guess back in 51 or 52, somewhere around the time that the novel was published, he said that he gave an indication that he wrote every day. And in later letters, he basically said he was disciplined.
Well, all I can say is that he told me he wrote every day, and that's all. I cannot add to that.
Are you fascinated at all by these letters and the tidbits that come out, or you through the years have respected his privacy?
No, I'm very happy to respect his privacy. What I'm fascinated by is the enormous conflict between the ideal and the real that all human beings have to deal with. And most of us take a compromised position. In fact, most of us put our ideals kind of in the background and accept the necessities of living our lives in the real world. So I'm fascinated when you come across a person who doesn't make our compromises. I find that quite interesting. Kafka told his friend Max Brod to burn all of his literature, all of his writing. That was his last request. And Max Brod disobeyed him and published it. I'm grateful for Max Brod's disloyalty to Kafka, because I was able to read all of this. Mm-hmm. On the other hand, I'm pretty fascinated by Kafka's last request. It's as if he felt that no matter how good he wasn't nearly as good as he felt he would have wanted to be. His desire to be the perfect writer made what he did write seem inferior to him and worthy only of being burnt.
It'd be interesting to see if Salinger made a similar request and whether his son will, if in fact he did, if his son honors it, or if would you like to see some of his work published?
I'd like to see what happens, but I have complete confidence that Matt Salinger will do the right thing. He seems a very level-headed, decent, and loyal son. So I'm curious what's going to happen, but I'm curious, but I don't really have a desire for things to turn out one way or the other. I really don't. I think we have to grant a talented and peculiar man like Salinger his peccadillos, his idiosyncrasies, and I'm willing to go with that.
Do you think most people's fascination is because they grew up with this novel, they read it as teenagers, they identify, or because he was just so secretive and in many ways they found his behavior rather odd?
Yes, of course it's a combination of both. If an ordinary unknown person led a life of a recluse, no one would pay attention. If a person who has become famous, as Salinger became famous with Catcher in the Rye, decides to be a recluse, then it becomes a big deal. It's sort of like the Lone Ranger. We're interested in the Lone Ranger not just because he wears a mask, but also because he rides around saving ordinary people. And Salinger, in a way, is a little like the Masked Man, the Lone Ranger. He's trying to save ordinary people with his Catcher in the Rye. The whole idea of the Catcher in the Rye, the preciousness of the innocence of childhood, and to try to save that if one could. So it's kind of an interesting combination.
Professor Alexis Levintin, thank you very much for taking the time to be here with us today.
Thanks a lot.
We appreciate it.
Bye-bye.